In my view, if every one of the gods that have been discredited, instead of only the 2 or 3 left to us that haven't yet been completely shown up as man-made fabrications and joined Thor and Ashtaroth and Quetzalcoatl and the Aztecs and all the others, if all of these were proven to be fraudulent and false and man-made, I believe our moral dilemmas would be exactly the ones we face now. All of us, atheist, agnostic, philosophical, Socratic, or true believer. We would still have to wonder about the purpose of our existence here. We would still have to wonder about the origins of the cosmos and of nature. We would still have to wonder about our duties to one another. We would still have to wonder about how to build the just city, how to reflect on truth and on beauty. All of these dilemmas would remain exactly the way they are, unaltered by any supernatural dimension. It's a problem principally because it is man-made, because to an extent it is true, as the church used to preach when it had more confidence, that we are, in some sense, originally sinful and guilty. If you want to prove that, you only have to look at the many religions that people have constructed to see that they are indeed the product of an imperfectly evolved primate species, about half a chromosome away from a chimpanzee, with a prefrontal lobe that's too small, an adrenaline gland that's too big, and various other evolutionary deformities about which we're finding out ever more. A species that is predatory, a species that's very fearful of itself and others and of the natural order, and above all, very, very willing, despite its protestations of religious modesty, to be convinced that the operations of the cosmos and the universe are all operating with us in mind. Make up your mind whether you want to be modest or not. But don't say that you were made out of dust, or if you're a woman, out of a bit of rib, or if you're a Muslim, out of a clot of blood, and you're an abject sinner born into guilt. But add, nonetheless, let's cheer up. The whole universe is still designed with you in mind. This is not modesty or humility. It's a man-made false consolation, in my judgment, and it does great moral damage. It warps, it begins by warping what we might call our moral sense of proportion. There is, whether you are a materialist or a supernaturalist, no particular reason to say that human life has any enormous innate value. After all, religion disposes of people in heaps and mounds and says, go out, we depart into eternal fire, you're dust, you're nothing. If you don't have our faith, you're nothing less than nothing, you're worse, or evil, wicked, so forth. So it's not as if by assuming a God, you suddenly find that life is all worthwhile after all. If it was that simple, we wouldn't have to be having this discussion. I think this, essentially, I ask myself, why do I care? Why do I care not just about myself and my children, but why do I think I often care in general? Well, if I didn't, I wouldn't belong to a species that would have got this far. It may sound a platitudinous answer, but I think there's some force to it. If we didn't have human solidarity, if we didn't realize that we are brothers and sisters one with another, that we have responsibilities, duties to one another, that these are not merely reciprocal in evolutionary terms, in other words, you be nice to me, I'll look out for you, but that they can involve real ties, real bonds of affection, friendship, even love. If we didn't know that we were able to think like that, we exempt quite a large minority of humans who are born without this, the sociopaths and psychopaths, who I suppose we have to concede are also made in God's image, if you accept that tautology. It leaves nothing really unexplained. That would tell us why we had warm feelings for one another, and also explain why we were here instead of having joined the species that went, all the other ones that went out of business, under the same divine supervision, I might add, including humanoid species like the Cro-Magnons and the Neanderthals, who it's quite clear buried each other with care and with love, looked out for one another, and so forth and so on, but somehow didn't make some divine grade. Do you see where I'm going with this? I do hope so. Pascal knew that there were always people, there would always be people, always had been people, who are constitutionally incapable of believing this stuff, can't be brought to believe it. And one of his cruder attempts to break down resistance of people like myself was this. He said, look, what have you got to lose? Say you believe in God, and if he does exist, you have a chance of his favor. If you go ahead like this and say he doesn't, what if he does exist? You lose everything. That's it. I don't think I've condensed it in any unfair way. That's it. That's why it's called Pascal's wager. Sometimes called Pascal's gambit, in fact, by mathematicians, but it has the correct echo to me precisely of the huckster on the racetrack saying, how can you lose? Have I got a bet for you? Can you imagine anything cheaper, really, or more sordid? The two things that it assumes, needs to assume, are these. One, a fantastically cynical God who's also a bloody fool. I mean, a nasty and cynical person who's also so thick that he would be fooled by me saying, tell you what, on the flip coin that you exist and I need a break, I'll say I believe in you. Says, oh, I'm really impressed now. You've just undergone a moral transformation. This Blaise Pascal is considered in the first rank of Christian thinkers, I might add. The second thing it assumes, of course, is the most corrupt and vulgar kind of consumer, the sort of person who would fall for a deal like that and would think, that would be nice. I'll bet correctly. I hope you'll forgive me, ladies and gentlemen, for mentioning this, because I don't at all want to invoke my own particular case in an attempt to gain your sympathy. I'll say it as objectively as I can. Some of you may have read that I'm not very well and may not have very long to live. I find it particularly objectionable that this wager, which Pascal offers to anyone at any time in their life, to be fair to him, tends to be pressed on you all the time, if you don't look as if you're going to last very long, by people who say, surely that now you might be frightened and not feeling at your best and afraid of a smelly and a disgusting end. Surely this would be the perfect moment to repudiate all the convictions of a lifetime. For some reason, that comes naturally to a lot of people of faith. I don't mind for myself, but I think it's the vilest kind of bullying to inflict on people in hospital and people who are in extremis. People have the nerve to ask me, well, if you don't believe in heaven and hell, what gives your life meaning? Do you not detect a slight insult as well as a slight irrationality to that question? You mean I'd have much more meaning in my life if I thought that I would die and I'd be given one chance, or would have been given while I was alive, one chance, and if I'd made a mistake, I'd be condemned eternally. That was the kind of judge I'd be facing. And in the meantime, it would be advisable to live my life in propitiation of this supernatural dictator. That would lend more meaning to my life than my view counter to Pascal, contra Pascal, that if there's any such judge, I'll be able to say, at least I never faked belief in you in order to win your approbation, sir, or ma'am, as the case might be. And if you are as reported, you'll have detected that those were my thoughts, and at least I wasn't a hypocrite. Pascal says, no, at least pretend you believe. It's win-win. This is corrupt reasoning. It's the reasoning of a huckster. And it lends no meaning to life at all. Still, why do I care? For example, why do I care? Why do I care about Rwanda? Why do I care about my Iranian friends fighting theocracy? Why do I give up my own time to them? Well, I'll tell you why. And I say it, I suppose, at the risk of embarrassment. It gives me great pleasure to do so. I like to feel that since we only have one life to live, that I can help people make it free as best I can and assist them in their real struggle for liberty, which in its most essential form is the struggle against theocracy, which is the original form that dictatorship and violation of human rights actually takes. If William Wilberforce was indeed animated by Christianity in his campaign against slavery, he should have been, because it was about time that there was a Christian who said that this trade had gone on long enough. And any Christian should have felt responsible for saying so, because for the entire period of its existence, slavery and the slave trade had been justified directly by reference to the Christian religion and by direct references to the warrant for slavery that's contained in Holy Writ and in Scripture. And that's why we like the captain who wrote Amazing Grace, because he'd been the captain of a slave ship. And he was just as much of a Christian when he was doing the first thing as he was when he was doing the second. The chances, though, that a member of the American Anti-Slavery Society, Thomas Paine, Benjamin Franklin, the others was not a Christian would be extremely high. The chances that until very, very, very late in the 19th century, a defender of slavery would be a Christian was statistically enormous. It therefore proves absolutely nothing about Christianity that some of its members finally turned against one of their foulest practices and impositions. And if I was a Christian, I would avoid this argument very carefully as tending to show that there is no basis in faith for morality, that our morality is innate to us. And it's very nice when sometimes religion catches up to morality for a change. Thank you.
If you allow faith schools, we'll allow them to have their faith schools. Cultural suicide. Cultural suicide. Don't let it happen to you. Don't let it happen where you live. Look how wonderfully it worked. You know it very well. What happened in Northern Ireland when it was allowed to segregate Protestant and Catholic schools. After all, they have different faiths. Oh, they do? I thought they were both Christian. I can't arbitrate this. No, they should have separate schools. They should never meet, never intermarry, never socialize. Beautifully that worked out. Now let's have it for Jews and Muslims too on the mainland. Let them all lie to their children. Let them all give their special myth. Let them all say to them that they're different. Let them not tell them that they're members of a civil society or a country or a nation. Let them denominate themselves by faith. Can't wait to see what happens. I think I know what's coming. I don't want my beloved country of birth to be turned into some f***ing Lebanon by people of faith. I don't want it. I'm going to fight it too. And you should get ready to fight it when they try it in your case. Don't allow this. Putting the word faith in front of something is no excuse for barbarism and cruelty and ignorance and stupidity, just as putting the word reverend in front of a stupid name like Falwell or Sharpton doesn't mean you should be on MSNBC. Learn to resist it because you're going to need to.
Well, Christopher,
this is about you.
I'm right there with.
I do not believe that I was created, and I don't believe I was created sick and then commanded to be well. I just choose not to believe it. I don't think it's a plausible proposition. I don't think that it's plausible to say that you hate the sin and love the sinner when you talk like Mr. Donohue does about homosexuals.
Now, why are people dead from sex? Is it because they are practicing natural sex, or are they practicing unnatural, promiscuous sex?
How do you love somebody? You love them by telling them the truth, not by confirming or affirming their sin. In Leviticus 18, God's perfect law when it comes to sexual matters is that thou shalt lay with another man shall be stoned to death. Just saying.
That's what I believe that the scripture says, that homosexuality is a sin.
It's a sin.
You think I'm sinful because I'm married to a man?
Yeah.
You do?
Yes, you're sinning. You are in a sinful relationship.
And I think it's casuistry anyway, because who really goes around saying, I don't like rape, but I love those rapists? I think we are divided as between those of us who attribute our presence here to the laws of biology and the laws of physics, and those of us who, and we are modest in doing that, I think, we say we submit ourselves to the evidence, and even if it comes up with conclusions that aren't very welcome to us, we will accept them if they're well-founded, and those who are conceited enough, I would say, arrogant enough, in fact, to think that they are here as the consequence of a divine design. There's all the difference in the world between those two worldviews, and the big difference is one of them has evidence for it and the other doesn't. And one of them will say in advance what would refute it. I can tell you, if you ask me, what evidence, if presented, would mean I'd have to change my mind, and the theist will never do that. He will never tell you in advance, show me this and I'll stop believing in it. There's always an infinite replenishment of the infinitely renewable resource of faith going on. In fact, it's the humility of it that makes me laugh at it in a way the most. They say that they're humble, these believers in God. They want to be written up as modest because they think that, of course, that God tells them they're worms, originally sinful, ingrates, incurable, made out of dust in one narrative, out of a clot of blood in the Quranic narrative, bad, off to a pretty shaky start, condemned since an original fall of man. Nonetheless, cheer up. The universe is designed with you in mind. This is a depraved form of sadomasochism, in my view. It's not good for you to go from this terrible abjection and serfdom in the one instance to this belief that you are the center of creation and the object of the cosmos in the other. It's a terrible alternation, a neurotic alternation between being much too servile and much too arrogant. Teaching of that kind, teaching about abstention, clearly cannot lead to death from sex. But to say that AIDS is death from sex is, I think, to commit an obscenity. I'm sorry to have to say that the brothers and sisters of our society who have succumbed to that appalling disease did not die of sex or of their sexuality. And remember, homosexuality is not just a form of sex, it's a form of love. They died. That's interesting. I wondered what kind of a growl I might get there. Well, I'll repeat it then. Homosexuals practice not just a form of sex, but a form of love. If you can't live with it, I think you're the poorer. However, what they died of was a filthy virus which can and will be cured. And the clear implication of what Dr. Donohue said was that it was some kind of judgment on their sexual preference. I'm sorry I can't sit here, rather stand here and take that. This is why I don't think secular morality needs to be defended from the barbaric superstitions and guilts and obscene suggestions that are made by the godly, or from the repressions and unguessable motives that lie behind people who talk and think and sound like that. I think the religion gets a free pass in making moral casuistry of this kind. I think it is possible. I may not be the best example of it, and I did flicker a bit with enthusiasm when the alcohol and tobacco lobbies were mentioned a moment ago. If you'd thrown in firearms, you'd have had me altogether. I may not be the best example for it, but it is possible and probably necessary that people lead ethical and moral lives without claiming the solipsism of divine protection. Thank you. I do insist that this kind of bad behavior is innate in religion, is part of religion itself. It's not an abuse of it or something undertaken in the name of. It's a direct consequence of the willingness to believe in the supernatural and the willingness to believe in a supernatural dictatorship in particular.
And we live on a very small planet in a very minor solar system on the very edge of a gigantic galaxy where the remainder of the planets just in our own solar system are either too fucking hot or too sodding cold to support life of any kind, as is true of very great swathes of our own planet, which is on a climatic knife edge, if we didn't know before, we know now. So to say that this is the center of the universe and the whole objective of the cosmos is to produce this conversation is an extraordinarily self-centered thing to do, it seems to me. And also doesn't, in return for its self-centeredness, which might be excused in the Randian terms, at least let's think we're gods, at least let's believe that we are the most beautifully charismatic sex maniacs have ever appeared on any planet, doesn't yield any knowledge, doesn't help us in the least to clarify anything. No, I think we would do much better to understand our place in the cosmos. And I think if we did, we'd turn to each other with a little more respect and concern and compassion and understanding. And maybe to the people who we found are spliced into our own DNA as well, having this wonderful sequencing, having abolished racism and creationism at one stroke, I regard that as a huge step forward, I must say, to understand one's kinship with all other humans, with some other animals, even with vegetables and plants. It doesn't make me feel worse, it makes me feel better. It also makes me feel I know where I am, which the other stuff simply doesn't. So I wouldn't trade that for any of your pseudo-universality, sorry.
I can't believe we're here alone by ourselves with each other 100%. I can't believe that.
Okay.
It is, I mean, it is rather a bleak thought. The problem is that you mustn't catch yourself disbelieving things because you might not want them to be true, or believing things because you might like them to be true, and fear of death. We're the only species that knows it's going to die. Not everyone is completely happy with the idea of checking out and becoming, going back to being atoms again. Religion makes the false promise that if you join the right group or make the right prayers or obeisances or propitiations, an exception to this unbreakable rule will be made in your own case. That's obviously nonsense. It's professional lying for profit by priests. But the desire to believe it, the desire to go in for wish thinking, the ability to do that is very great. She wanted to know when I wrote it off. Well, I've already told you. She perhaps wasn't tuned in when we did old Mrs. Watts, Mrs. Jean Watts. But it's more a matter of realizing that I didn't believe it than having believed it and repudiating that. That was, for me, a realization of unbelief rather than a conversion experience. There are, just as we keep on being told, well, but think about how many people are faithful and religious. Well, if that's a point, which I doubt it is, then it must also be a point that there are many, many, many of us who are so constituted that we can't believe this nonsense. It doesn't make any impression on us. It's white noise. It rolls off like water off a duck's back. And we are made in the image of God too, I presume. So he must have wanted at least to be some people who weren't taken in.
Why do you think then that over 1 billion people on this earth think there's some kind of a higher power?
I don't know that they do, but I think that the reason would be, let's grant that they really do believe this and give them credit for sincerity in the belief. My analysis in my book is this: we are pattern-seeking animals. It's a good thing about us that we look for patterns, we look for recurrences and consistencies and so forth. And it's a weakness as well as a strength, because for example, we prefer a conspiracy theory to no theory at all, but we do look for patterns, and it's quite difficult for us to imagine that we don't know the cause of things, or the first cause. We'd like to think we could find that out. And we also have, it's very easy to persuade us that things are all about us and that we're the object of all this. So if people say, well, look, the stars move in a predictable way, the seasons move in a predictable way, there must be some system here, it must mean something, it must have been started by someone. Now, as you know, all of these are completely unwarrantable assumptions, but the counterintuitive is the problem with the truth of it. Don't ever think you are the center of the world. Be very careful of assuming that you are the object of a divine design, that there's something special just about being you. That's all you have to prove. That why wouldn't a person such as yourself have God on their side? Why wouldn't it be? Of course God would care who I slept with, what I ate, what holy day I observed. Why would he not? Surely that's why the heavens are arranged in the starry beauty and array that the form they take. And then you read Hamlet's reflections with Yorick at the side of the grave, and you are forced to wonder if maybe, even though it's a less beautiful thought, it could be that the galaxies are not arranged with you in mind. You asked me what I think the source is, and where you almost seem to ask, where does my divine spark come from? Well, sweetie, I don't know. But I don't mind not knowing. I look forward to discovering further frontiers of my ignorance. Socrates was never wiser than when he said the definition of the educated is the one who has some idea of how little he knows. And the more education you get, and the older, I warn you, you get, the more you'll find out that you know more and more about less and less and less, and more things. And it's wonderful. It's a tremendous experiment in learning. So I'm quite happy to say I don't know, but the believer has to say that they do know. They can't hedge this. If it be not true, as St. Paul says, that Christ crucified rose again, we are the unhappiest people living. That I can take seriously. That I can understand. And I take leave to doubt it. And I don't believe there's any salvation. I don't believe there is any redemption. No person no other human being, no other primate, no fellow mammal of mine, however clever they may be, is in any position to say that they know God's will, or God's word, or God's desire or intention. This information is not accessible to human beings, and therefore my first statement is this: those who do claim that they know are already, in a sense, discredited. They're deluded, and in a sense, they're the first ones who have to concede that the argument goes on without them, because we have to be awed, all of us, more and more, all the time, more and more awed at that, as we discover how much more there is to know by how little of it we do know or can know. It's only those who say that they know they are certain who we have to distrust, a priori, if I can use that expression. Those of us who say that the rule of doubt and of uncertainty, which also governs all other observable principles in the universe, I think are entitled to say that until something like evidence is produced, we're entitled to be free of it.
The same is true of our Muslim brothers and sisters. They say, you may not know it yet, but our prophet had the last revelation, the only one.
Right, the final one. There's always a final revelation.
Ultimate one.
Yeah.
Your revelations were not bad. We agree with you about the virgin birth. We agree with you about various of the more horrible Mosaic prohibitions. You notice that Islam plagiarizes from Judaism and Christianity only the most horrible bits and leaves out the Greek stuff. It does. But they do all that. They say, well, we even think you're people of the book. They tolerate you, in other words. They say, we tolerate you. I'm not going to be tolerated by these people. They say, but we've got something last and final, ultimate. You only need this one book. If you only get round to believing in it, you would be happy. But we can't be happy until you do. Now, I'm very sorry. I'm extremely sorry to say this, and I'll put it as mildly as I can, but I decline to be spoken to in that tone of voice by anybody. I hope that's plain.
Fair enough.
I hope that's absolutely plain. I won't be talked to like that. I'm not going to be tolerated by the admirers of an illiterate Middle Eastern peasantry.
No, I see that,
I think we'd be better off outgrowing it.
We've all,
On this question of who's boss, and why I don't think the Eternal Father idea is a good one. I'm sure I'm not the only father here. I have 3 children. My job as a father is to get out of their way, is to do my best for them, and then make room for them. What if I was to say to them, oh, don't worry, I'll always be here? Not as in, I'll always be here for you, as in, I'm never going away. You'll never see the back of me. You'll never get to say goodbye, Daddy. No, I'll always be here. In fact, I'll be here long after you've died. In fact, I'm rather looking forward to that, because then I can sit in judgment on you. This is not even a benevolent form of despotism, is it? When you allow yourself to think about it. It's somewhat worse than I was saying before about the way that religion makes people first be terribly abject and then terribly solipsistic and arrogant and conceited. If it were true that all these things are attributable to an eternal Father who is unknowable except by those who claim, as Dr. Lennox does, sources of information denied to me and many other people, what would it mean at the minimum? It would mean we were living under an unalterable, unchallengeable dictatorship, which might or might not be benign. We've no assurance it would be benign. In my view, benign dictatorships are the worst, but that's another story. It would mean we were subjected to everlasting, round-the-clock surveillance, waking and sleeping. We would never have a private moment. Everything we did and thought would be known and supervised and invigilated and either rewarded or punished. Even Big Brother in George Orwell's 1984 couldn't be absolutely sure what all his subjects were thinking, but there was the crime of thought crime. You could be charged with it under the divine dispensation, no problem. You're convicted of thought crime before you've even had the thought, because everything is knowable. And how would the God who convicted you know? Because he'd already created you full of dirt and sin and wickedness. That's part of the design. And the horror of it, the fascistic element of it, is this: you're created sick, and then you're ordered to be well. So you're created full of dirty thoughts and wickedness and wrong ambitions and and impure and foul nature, and then you're told, you better cure yourself pretty fast, otherwise I won't be answerable for the consequences. This is the worst imaginable kind of unfreedom, and I have to say I distrust those who wish that it were true. In my opinion, the original emancipation, the first emancipation that humans must undergo is the freeing of themselves from this man-made and mind-forged manacle. It might be asked, why don't I want it to be true? Why don't I wish it to be true? Well, I'll tell you, because once you admit that this despot exists, you will find yourself in the real world, in the here and now, subjected to the rule of man-made power, purely man-made power, ruled by other primates and other mammals who claim the right to do anything they want with you because they have God on their side and because their rule is divine.
That when Joseph discovered that Mary was pregnant, he didn't suddenly believe in a miracle. He wanted to divorce her. Why? Because he knew exactly as we do where babies come from. He wasn't stupid, nor was he pre-scientific. And it took a lot of convincing for him to accept what I believe to be the true solution, that this was a unique miracle of God encoding himself into humanity. Okay.
So,
will you promise to do it quickly?
So if your wife is pregnant and you know it's not you, the only alternative is that it's the Holy Spirit.
That's a false...
David Hume deals with this quite well. He says, in the case of the laws of nature being suspended, you have to ask yourself, have they been suspended in my favor, or am I possibly under a misapprehension? I think it's Thomas Paine who asks, which is more likely, that the laws of nature are suspended or that a Jewish girl should tell a fib? We have to grow up out of this stuff, you know? This question of the beginning of things is, of course, very important. And if you think that it must have had a beginner as well as a beginning, that it's not just a design or an apparent design, but it must have had a designer, you are only asking for another question to be asked, which is, who created this creator? Who designed this designer? Who fixed up this prime mover? Who was the prime mover for that prime mover? The common word for this in logic and some philosophy courses is it's an infinite regression. It doesn't really get you anywhere, but as I say, it wouldn't get you to religion, even if you could prove that there must have been a prime mover. It wouldn't get you to the worship of other human beings as if they were prophets or saviors or redeemers. It can't help you get there. You have to believe that as a matter of faith or not. You can't do it from physics. There's furthermore, I think, an almost insuperable ontological problem involved here. Suppose it to be true. Suppose that I concede it. Suppose there must be such a designer or an individual, an intelligence, something like a person that does this. How could I know it? Which person is smarter, sufficiently smarter, perhaps I should say, smart enough, smarter than me, smarter than anyone here, smarter, I dare say, even than Frank, to know this person and what's in his mind? I submit that it's not possible for another human being to tell you he knows this to be true, any more than it's possible for me to tell you, which I don't try and do, because I'm not unreasonable in this way, that I know it isn't true. But don't you see that there's all the difference in the world between my saying I can't know it and Frank saying, well, I can't prove it, because he wants you to believe it's necessary so that you will then become Christian. And I say that that's a leap that you simply cannot make, and you certainly can't make on the basis of evidence. I think the religious would be much better to leave evidence alone where they don't excel and to concentrate on faith, where at least they can claim some kind of monopoly. If we were only discussing ontological questions, that would be all very well, and it could be quite amusing. I could say that you require a higher degree of standard of proof for your proposition than I perhaps do for mine, and you'd probably accept that, and so forth, and we could go back and forth. But we'd be paltering again with the essence of the matter, which is this. The difference between the theist and the deist is as follows. The deist says, may not make sense without some kind of designer. The theist says, when I tell you what to do, Christopher, I have God on my side. The deist says, he can tell what God wants of me what length I should shave off the end of my penis, if I'm a boy or have a male child, or off the clitoris if it's a female child. He knows through the exactitude what the proportions of that should be, what the diet should be, what the dietary laws ought to be, who I should sleep with, and in what position. And various other things. And since God doesn't ever directly appear and say, do it this way, it's done for him, this is really convenient, by human representatives who claim to act in his name. So that's why I think your standard of proof should be a great deal higher, because if the reason this point is important to you is because it would mean real power in the only world that actually exists, which is the material world, of you over me. And you wonder why I'm not keen. If Jesus and Muhammad and Abraham and Moses had never been born, which in any case I tend to doubt, or if all the stories told about them were untrue, if that was suddenly to be found and everyone had to admit it, some people I know would go into a panic. Now what will we do? We have no morals suddenly. What could be more nonsensical than that? As a matter of fact, the position we occupy would be precisely the same as it is now. If none of these texts had ever been written, if none of these supposed utterances had ever been made, we would still have to reason together about how to treat one another, about how to build a just city, and about how to have irony and a sense of humor. So that's my answer. And I think the idea that there's a supernatural dictatorship required for us to think about our duties and responsibilities to each other is the most sinister idea ever invented. These questions cannot be referred up to a celestial dear leader. We do not live and do not wish to live, fortunately in any case don't have to live, in a divine North Korea. Thank you. We do have the gift of pattern seeking in our minds, and we will pursue this gift, often at our own expense, but at great hazard and often with great ingenuity. That has a plus side and a minus side. It often means that we prefer a junk explanation to no explanation at all, or a conspiracy theory to no theory. And religion takes its place in our evolution in this precise manner. It's the first and worst explanation we came up with. It's the best we could do when we didn't know we lived on a cooling planet with big fissures in its crust. When we didn't know there were microorganisms that had power over us, we didn't have dominion over them. To the contrary. When we didn't know we lived on a spherical planet, we didn't know we revolved around other spherical bodies, everything was terrifying, new, mysterious, and often lethal. It was our first attempt at philosophy in that way, first attempt at cosmology, first attempt at geography, biology, all the rest of it. A hopeless attempt belonging to the bawling, fearful, ignorant childhood of our species, but very necessary. And it possesses still the advantage of having come first. The terrible advantage over the mind and over learning that it possesses is its originality. And the history of human emancipation is the struggle to get away from this terrifying, foolish, ignorant first try. The species left Africa about 75,000 years ago, having probably shrunk down to about 2,000 or 3,000 people as a result of a terrible climatic disturbance, probably from Indonesia, probably from a predecessor of Krakatoa, which meant that we were this close to joining the 99.8% of all species ever living on the surface of this planet who became extinct. Some design, by the way. Profuse creation of millions and millions and millions of life forms, all to be wiped out, with not even anyone left to testify to their previous existence. We nearly joined that lot. Managed to get out of it just in time. Suppose we've only been around for 75,000 years. Monotheism, Christianity, Judaism, Islam shows up, what, 4,000 or 5,000 years ago at the most. So if you give me my most microscopically small assumption of human existence, for at least 70,000 years, heaven watches as the human species is born, dies, usually of its teeth, usually at about 20, watches this with indifference. Thousands and thousands of generations, miserable, illiterate, starving, hungry, to say nothing of the wars they'll fight with each other, to say nothing of the cruelties they will inflict, as well as the ones they will suffer just from existence. And only 3 or 4, perhaps 5,000 years ago, heaven decides it's enough of that. It's time for an intervention. And the best way to do it would be in the most primitive part of the Middle East, not in China where people can read and have looked at telescopes. No, in the most primitive part of the Middle East, basically by offering human sacrifice to them. This is a doctrine that cannot be believed by anyone who's studied anything scientific, anything historical, anything archaeological, anything paleological, anything biological. Can't be believed by anyone. It can't be only believed by someone who wants to be a plaything and a slave of a pitiless totalitarian power.
Whereas, is it not written that I come not to bring a peace but a sword? Surely it is. Is it not written that those who won't follow me must depart and be cast into everlasting fire? Not a very gentle or pacific remark. Is it not said that if you don't give up your family, if you don't give up thrift, if you don't give up everyone who loves you and everything you love to sacrifice yourself for me, you're not worthy? These are strongly coercive and implicitly authoritarian or even totalitarian statements. And as C.S. Lewis rightly says, it's one of the very rare occasions where I agree with him, he said, you may not say that the preachments of Jesus of Nazareth are all right, even if you don't accept the religious basis of them. Lewis quite correctly says, if you don't accept that this man was the Son of God, you'll have to notice that many of his statements and sermons are either wicked or insane, or both. It's only on the belief that the world is very soon coming to an end, and that he himself has the right to claim a messianic role in this conclusion, that any of it can make any sort of sense at all. And everyone here knows at least some of the examples of what would be counted as wicked or insane if the messianic claims were found to be questionable, which they have been. I'm a Navy brat myself. I'm from Portsmouth, and there's a famous story about a young officer undergoing a rigorous examination to pass for captain. And he's told to picture himself on a leeward shore with a very strong wind driving him towards the rocks. He's asked, what are you going to do? He says, well, cram on all sail and steer to starboard, hard down on the tiller and on the wheel. So, but the wind keeps coming. You're still being driven on. What are you going to do now? He said, cram on more sail and keep the wheel very hard down away from the leeward side. And they said, but you're still being driven onto those rocks, young man. What are you going to do now? Just cram on more sail and keep the rudder and the tiller hard down on the starboard side. And he's interrupted. He said, where are you getting all this extra sail from? And he says, the same place you're getting all your extra wind from. I want to warn you, as I close, ladies and gentlemen, against the dangers of tautology. If everything that cannot be explained, everything that is mysterious to us, numinous say, or transcendent, must therefore be laid to the charge or the credit of a supernatural being, then nothing remains to be explained. Everything is in potential explicable. There's no problem to begin with. There's no point in this argument. Of course there's no mystery. There's no need for cogitation. There's no need for reflection. It must be part of a divine plan. I hope you can see the fallacy that protrudes from that conclusion too.
I remember being asked by one of my children once, when I said, well, what was there at the Big Bang? And I said, well, you have to imagine, this shows how poverty-stricken our own vocabulary is, and I suspect how poverty-stricken our own capacity is. In other words, I think there are some things, not that we don't understand or know, but that we cannot. So we're reduced to sort of primitive images. But I said, suppose you could picture all of matter, the whole of matter, condensed into something like a very small, dense black suitcase of the kind you see people carrying money in crime thrillers. And it's about to fly open. That's what you'd have to be able, and everything that's ever going to be is inside that. That was the best I could do. And I don't think many people could do, if I say it myself, that much better. But I was completely unhorsed because the kid said, well, what was outside the suitcase? And I thought, oh, well, I can't do that. And I don't know anyone who can. And that, in a way, would be my whole point. I don't have to know. You do. You're the one who says you know, not me. The theist and the deist say, oh, come on. We know this is only possible with an author. It's only possible with a creator. It's only possible with a master and commander. It's only possible with a dictator. You're welcome. I don't need 5 minutes. I wrote a book once about a famous building called the Parthenon, without which I could not be, without which our civilization couldn't be. Pre-Christian, by the way, as is a huge amount of the civilization that Habermas claims to be inspired by it. That to one side. The symmetry and the beauty and the frozen music and poetry of the Parthenon and of the Greek style is an indispensable thing. If it were to be destroyed, I would feel sort of orphaned. But I have no interest in the religion that used to animate it. The cult of Pallas Athena is dead and void to me. So is the idea of Athenian imperialism. So are the so-called mysteries of Eleusis and the rest of it. All that's left for me are the schools of philosophy that are worth studying. So again, it's going to be a question: how do we assimilate what was to previous generations and previous religions and extinct faiths something so important? How do we keep the value that is innate in that without surrendering to the cults and illusions that so much animated it? These are very important cultural issues. Okay? And I submit that we can do it.
I believe myself that we can recover the lost connection, the one that monotheism severed between Athens and Jerusalem. And we could get back a world where philosophy was valued. The beauty of science was considered worth studying, worth revering even. Where literature would be the key to the study of ethics and morality. And if you wanted the transcendent, you'd have love and sex and music. And you wouldn't need any supernatural permission for any of this nonsense. I think I miss it terribly. I feel as if something was torn away from me before I was born by the loss of that. But we're smart enough to get it back. If only we will leave behind the hideous nonsense of the holy books and the vile preachments of those who want the world to come to an end.
If you think that there's a creator who's made you specially and who watches over you and supervises you, who cares about you and wants you to do well and even wants you to survive death, I have to say, I think it's a preposterous proposition, because I have to be honest, and an irrational one, and a fatuous one, and a sinister one, because the idea of wanting a father who never dies and won't quit is infantilizing. But suppose you did think that, shouldn't it make you happy? It doesn't make them happy. It doesn't make them better at all. They won't be happy till I believe it too. So the first principle is, let's separate that. Keep it to yourselves. Go to any church you like. Build any church you want. Do it with your own money. Don't ask the government to teach this stuff to my children in a government school. We won't have that. And surely, in other words, I don't, when I'm offended by a filthy article I read about atheists and Jews and secularists, I have to, bombardments of stuff of this kind comes at me all the time. I don't go out and burn down the nearest mosque because I've been offended, do I? Don't be ridiculous. But I'm supposed to respect those who do such things. I'm supposed to treat them with an extra delicacy. Why should I be doing that? Who's the offended one here, really? I'm not going to make a big point about my feelings being hurt. I have a thick skin, I have a broad back, I've studied Socrates, I think the Socratic method's more convincing. But you act as if I'm the one who's offending them by saying, I find your beliefs actually rather unconvincing. And in any case, I'm not going to have them forced on me. Now, is that finally clear? Is it? I hope so. Good.
Why don't you take something away from people that gives meaning to 95% of the American people and replace it with something that gives meaning to just 5% of the American people?
Well, what an incredibly stupid question. First, I've said repeatedly that this stuff cannot be taken away from people. It is their favorite toy, and it will remain so. As Freud said, in The Future of an Illusion, it will remain that way as long as we're afraid of death and have no problem, which is, I think, likely to be quite a long time. Second, I hope I've made it clear that I'm perfectly happy for people to have these toys and to play with them at home and hug them to themselves and so on and share them with other people who come around and play with the toys. So that's absolutely fine. They are not to make me play with these toys. Okay? I will not play with the toys. Don't bring the toys to my house. Don't say my children must play with these toys. Don't say my toys might be a condom. Here we go again. Are not allowed by their toys. I'm not going to have any of that. Enough with clerical and religious bullying and intimidation. Is that finally clear? Have I got that across? Thank you. I've known Dinesh for a long time. I know him to be a very humane and courteous and considerate and decent man. And I don't think he understands how wicked he sounds to so many people in this hall tonight. When he says, look, you've made a perfectly fair offer. We can torture you to death if we want, for the crime only of being born. But all you have to do is throw yourself on our mercy, and it'll be okay. Why don't you just do it? My dear Dinesh, do you not know what you sound like when you say that? I can hardly bear to look at you.
You're implying
that you could say something so evil, so stupid, so nasty, and so intolerant. It is what Fulk Greville says in this wonderful verse. It says, here is the order. You are created sick, and you are ordered to recover. And you're ordered on pain of death and torture forever. This is totalitarianism to the nth degree.
No,
it is the most refinement of cruelty and stupidity that is possible to picture.
It's
and
really
you don't
not.
get
There
it
is
when
a-
people ask, does it seem okay to you? Say, you always have the chance to sprawl and grovel and beg and plead, and you might get off.
I, for one, will take it as extremely insulting if any person of faith makes the assumption that their faith gives them a moral edge on me. I want to hear a lot more apologizing from the faith-based communities for the evil that they've done before they even start clearing their throats and telling me I wouldn't know right from wrong without their permission. I'm sorry, I won't be, can't be spoken to in that tone of voice, and nor should any of you.
It is a horrible idea that there is somebody who owns us, who makes us, who supervises us, waking and sleeping, who knows our thoughts, who can convict us of thought crime, thought crime, just for what we think, who can judge us while we sleep for things that might occur to us in our dreams, who can create us sick, as apparently we are, and then order us on pain of eternal torture to be well again. To demand this, to wish this to be true, is to wish to live as an abject slave. Why do you want it? Why do you want to arrive at a terminus of unfreedom where there is a celestial authority upon whom all things depend and from which all things flow? Why do you want that, and how on earth do you know that there's any case to be made for its existence?
I'm approached by Christian proselytizers and told, you may not realize this, but somebody died for your sins about roughly 2,000 years ago, happens to have been the Son of God. He took them away, he took all this away for you. All you have to do is invoke it, throw your sins on him, and you're cleansed. And you can hope for redemption, you have the means of grace, you have the hope of glory, you can hope to live eternally. A pretty amazing offer for a human sacrifice 2,000 years ago that you had no part in, that you would have stopped if you could, if you were a witness to it, that you didn't ask for, that was not conducted by you or for which you're in any sense responsible. But do they leave it at that? No. You're free to, it's a bit like Pascal's wager again, you're free to say no to this. You can refuse this offer if you like, but God help you if you do. You are going to be terribly punished for turning this kind offer down. Now, that's the totalitarian principle again. And I say it with what you may, sorry, you must not think is my last breath. I say it decidedly, and after much reflection, I decline to be spoken to in that tone of voice, and I hope you will too. A miracle is defined not as a part of the natural order, but as a suspension of the natural order.
No, an intervention.
You can't say of the Big Bang, which is the foundation of the natural order, that it's a suspension of what it starts. You may not do that. However, if you meet someone in the street who you yesterday saw executed, you can say, either that an extraordinary miracle has occurred or that you are under a very grave misapprehension. And David Hume's logic on this, I think, is quite irrefutable. He says, what is more likely, that the laws of nature have been suspended in your favor and in a way that you approve, or that you've made a mistake? And in each case you must, and especially if you didn't see it yourself and you're hearing it from someone who says that they did. I would go further and say the following. I'll grant you that it would be possible to track the pregnancy of the woman Mary, who's mentioned about 3 times in the Bible, and to show that there was no male intervention in her life at all. But yet she delivered herself of a healthy baby boy. I can say, I don't say that's impossible. Parthenogenesis is not completely unthinkable, but it does not prove that his paternity is divine. And it wouldn't prove that any of his moral teachings were thereby correct. Nor, if I was to see him executed one day and see him walking the streets the next, would that show that his father was God, or his mother was a virgin, or that his teachings were true, especially given the commonplace nature of resurrection at that time and place. After all, Lazarus was raised, never said a word about it. The daughter of Jairus was raised, didn't say a thing about what she'd been through. And the Gospels tell us that at the time of the crucifixion, all the graves in Jerusalem opened, and their occupants wandered around the streets to greet. So that it seems the resurrection was something of a banality at the time. Not all of those people clearly were divinely conceived. So I'll give you all the miracles, and you'll still be left exactly where you are now, holding an empty sack. Now, on the question of Pascal, the famous wager that Dinesh put forward so softly, I think the best way perhaps to distinguish my view from his is to say what I think about it. The wager, this vulgar gamble, this 3-card Monte offered by a Catholic reasoner says, what have you got to lose, Buster? Bet it's true and you win. Bet it's false, you lose. Why is that true and why is that moral?
Have to ask you to wrap up.
Yeah, first, who's asking? Who's asking you to make this way? Who's saying, which divinity is saying, get this wrong? I'm fascinated to see which way you bet, because if you bet wrong, you're going straight to hell. What about that, for one thing? Second, which deity is not capable of saying, well, Mr. Hitchens, I notice that you, even on penalty of hell and condemnation, will not agree to worship me. You've been told what the odds are, you've been told what the stakes are. They must have impressed you in some way, but you say the evidence isn't good enough and the reasoning is even worse. And would not the sort of deity that you might expect Dinesh D'Souza or Mr. Taunton to respect say, well, I make some allowance there for a little intellectual courage, perhaps. Maybe a little moral integrity. No, you bet wrong. You're going to be tortured, not just for a long time, but forever. This is why I think I can close by saying that religion, as offered to you by its advocates, is immoral and irrational, and that the tyranny that it proposes you live under, fortunately, has no evidence to support the idea of its existence, and that by this discovery, and this alone, we are made aware of the truth, and that truth can make us free. The Catholic Church, said Newman, holds it better for the sun and moon to drop from heaven, for the earth to fail, and for all the many millions on it to die in extremest agony, than that one soul, I will not say will be lost, but should commit one venial sin, should tell one willful untruth, or should steal one farthing without excuse. You'll have to say it's beautifully phrased, ladies and gentlemen. But to me, and here's my proposition, what we have here, and picked from no mean source, is a distillation of precisely what is twisted and immoral in the faith mentality. Its essential fanaticism, its consideration of the human being as raw material, and its fantasy of purity. Once you assume a creator and a plan, it makes us objects in a cruel experiment whereby we are created sick and commanded to be well. I'll repeat that. Created sick and then ordered to be well. And over us to supervise this is installed a celestial dictatorship. a kind of divine North Korea. Greedy, exigent, I would say more than exigent, greedy for uncritical praise from dawn till dusk, and swift to punish the original sins with which it so tenderly gifted us in the very first place. However, let no one say there's no cure. Salvation is offered. Redemption, indeed, is promised at the low price of the surrender of your critical faculties. Religion, it might be said, must be said, would have to admit, makes extraordinary claims, but though I would maintain that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, rather daringly provides not even ordinary evidence for its extraordinary supernatural claims. Therefore, we might begin by asking, and I'm asking my opponent as well as you, is it good for the world to appeal to our credulity and not to our skepticism? Is it good for the world to worship a deity that takes sides in wars and human affairs? To appeal to our fear and to our guilt, is it good for the world? To our terror of death, is it good to appeal? To preach guilt and shame about the sexual act and the sexual relationship, is this good? To terrify children with the image of hell and eternal punishment, not just of themselves, but of their parents and those they love. Perhaps worst of all, to consider women an inferior creation. Is that good for the world? And can you name me a religion that has not done that? There is actually only one cure for poverty as it happens, and everybody knows it. And it's well understood and it's perfectly simple. It's called the empowerment of women. If you give women control, if you will allow women control over the number of times they have babies, I'll just put it as family style as that. If you'll give them that, and maybe throw in a handful of seeds and a bit of credit, if you do that, the floor of the whole society will rise. Everything, the whole floor of development will rise. That's the proposition Mother Teresa dedicated her life to opposing. Name me a monotheistic religion that dedicates itself to the empowerment of women. Religion forces nice people to do unkind things, and also makes intelligent people say stupid things. Handed a small baby for the first time, is it your first reaction to think, beautiful, almost perfect, now please hand me the sharp stone for its genitalia that I may do the work of the Lord? No. It is, as the great physicist Steven Weinberger has very aptly put it, in the ordinary moral universe, the good will do the best they can, the worst will do the worst they can, but if you want to make good people do wicked things, you'll need religion. Everyone in the civilized world has roughly agreed, including the majority of Arabs and Jews and the international community, that there should be enough room for two states, for two peoples in the same land. I think we have a rough agreement on that. Why can't we get it? The UN can't get it, the US can't get it, the Quartet can't get it, the PLO can't get it, the Israeli parliament can't get it. Why can't they get it? Because the parties of God have a veto on it, and everybody knows that this is true. Because of the divine promises made about this territory, there will never be peace, there will never be compromise. There will instead be misery, shame, and tyranny, and people will kill each other's children for ancient books and caves and relics. And who is going to say that this is good for the world? Do you wish it to be true that there is someone who has you under permanent, round-the-clock supervision and surveillance, who knows what you think even when you are asleep, who can convict you, I borrow again from the Big Brother analogy, of thought crime, and who can condemn you forever to eternal penalty and torture if you make the smallest mistake, who creates you sick, who makes you a sinner, who says you are originally wicked, and then orders you to be well and to recover on penalty of torture. What is this but the most horrific sadomasochistic prostration of the human personality before the most interstellar coldness of authority and tyranny? Why does anyone wish this was true? To emancipate oneself from this, it seems to me, is the beginning of the long story of human liberation. And from very early days, from Democritus, from Lucretius, from Epicurus, all the way through to Spinoza, to Einstein, to our own day, that's been the real struggle. The right to look the churches and the priests and the godheads in the eye and say, I don't believe it. I don't believe a word of it, and you can't make me. It's the beginning of civilization, as well as the beginning of liberation. There are people who will, when a grenade is lobbed through the window, throw themselves on it before it can blow up. It does happen. There are people who die under torture without giving away the whereabouts of their comrades. There are people who go do bomb disposal work and sit defusing huge device. They know any minute. It does happen. It's always happened. It's common to every known human society. It's a part of every heroic narrative of every known society there's ever been. Those who do it are honored. And it doesn't require divine sanction or permission. It is something we can all aspire to.
Yes, you
but
know
we do not get it from Big Brother. If we did, that would degrade it. It would mean it wasn't heroic. It wasn't brave. It wasn't individual. It wasn't exemplary.
Why are these things
Didn't deserve
good?
anything. Because it would be in the hope either of a reward from Big Brother or for fear of punishment from it. It would abolish morality.
Why?
It destroys ethics. It means the individual example is dust. I used to wonder when I was a child, what's it like when they told me, here's what hell is like. I could see what hell would be like. Eternal punishment for things I'd never done. I could get that point all right. But eternal praise for an eternal leader that goes on forever, always thanking him, always groveling to him, always sprawling in front of him. I thought, sounds like hell to me. But I couldn't picture it. I've been in North Korea, I can picture it. The sprawling, the abject groveling of a whole people in front of a godhead. It's a totally worshipful state with a god, and it's the most horrible tyranny on the face of the earth, possibly ever on the face of the earth. And I've been there, and I've never been so happy to leave anywhere in my entire life, which North Koreans can't do. They can't get out of it. They're locked in that jail, and that godly jail forever. But at least you can die and get out of North Korea. Monotheism doesn't allow you that. When you die, according to Judaism, of which Christianity is a plagiarism, and to Islam, which is a plagiarism of Judaism, an ignorant plagiarism of Judaism and Christianity, that's when the fun really begins. That's when the tyranny really starts. That's when you find out who's boss. Who wants this to be true? Who thinks that this kind of servile, abject, groveling, fearful life, the preparation for an eternity of misery and shame, is worth having, is worth defending, is worth speaking up for? Risky though it is, terrifying though it can be, that our only hope, and actually also our only joy with this great risk, is that of thinking for ourselves and realizing it cannot be done for us. There are no redeemers, there are no eternal fathers, there is no dear leader, there is no great leader, there is no supreme leader to whom we can look for our own rescue, morally or intellectually. I'll leave you with that thought, and I thank you very much for your attention to me. You can't not have noticed, not just in spite of, but because of the great dexterity of my friend Dinesh D'Souza, that he wants to argue for deism. In other words, you can't absolutely show there's no prime mover. You can't absolutely show there's no designer. You can't absolutely disprove. No atheist has ever been able to wish to claim that you can say there is no author, but you can say there's no argument for the authorship or the design or the deity or the creator that's ever been valid or coherent or integral. But he wants to smuggle through the customs of the argument about deism an argument for theism. If he could prove there was an author, a prime mover, a deity, a creator, which he can't do, and no such person on his side, even as clever as he, or cleverer, has ever been able to do, all his main work as a Christian would still be ahead of him, because he would still have to be able to show that this author knew that you and I were here tonight, that they minded with whom we went to bed and in what position, that they minded what we ate, that they minded how we circumcised our children, in what manner genital mutilation was done by us, that they cared. Now, there's a huge difference between the concept of an authorship of the cosmos and the universe and the idea of an intervening, caring, utterly supervising, knowing, and some say loving, though they have a lot to prove at that point, deity. And I shall begin by not attempting anything surreptitious, not trying to smuggle through customs a theism by a deism or an atheism by an anti-deism. I shall say specifically that I'm an anti-theist and that I believe that the emancipation from religion is the fundamental emancipation that the human mind must undergo before it can consider any very serious questions. And I'll phrase it like this. Our objection, my objection on our side, to the concept of a divine supremacy is this, that it refers all the undecidable, agonizing questions of our species, of our being. How shall we live? How shall we make the just city? Is there a point to our existence? How are we to consider the rights and duties that we have one with and to another? And many, many other extremely arduous and terrible questions that no one human generation will ever solve or is ever going to be able to solve, and refers them upward to a totalitarian, absolutist, unanswerable monarch, and says, only this tyrant can decide. And without him, we would have no knowledge of ethics or morality or realism or any of these questions. It is the beginning of servility. It's the beginning of abjection. It is the definition of the master-slave relationship. It's what needs to be broken in our mentality before we can be free. It is the reason for the Virginia Statute on religious liberty. It is the reason for the First Amendment for the Constitution. It is the reason for the idea of the separation of church and state, that it cannot be, it may not be, theologically legislated. The manner in which we discuss philosophy, morals, ethics, and all the other great questions that will always agitate us, and to which there is, it can be fairly said, no end. If I make no other point this evening, if I leave nothing else in your mind, I'll be grateful if you've listened just that far. The question remains, and I'll phrase it again properly. If it is believed that without religion, there could be no safe judgment about right and wrong, no evolution of proper and serious moral and ethical ideas. If that is true, then you ought to be able to have named, instead of ducking the question, a moral statement made or an ethical statement made or action performed by a believer or person of faith that I couldn't replicate. Now, I've asked this question in public, on television, in face-to-face encounters, on the radio and in print, to the Archbishop of Canterbury, Cardinal Archbishop of Nigeria, various important rabbis, Christian apologists in the academy. I've never had a reply to it. And I think that's interesting. And I not only didn't get one this evening, I got an attempt to change the subject. There's a prize for it, by the way, and I've come up with an answer myself, a partial one, which is better than any that yet a believer's come up with. I'll tease you about what it's going to be. You might have to beg me later. But there's a corollary to my question, and it's this. Can you name for me a wicked statement made or a wicked action taken by a person of faith because of their religion? Can you do that? Yes, you can. You've just thought of one. In fact, you've just thought of another one. The genital mutilation community is almost entirely faith-based, for example. The suicide murder community is almost perfectly faith-based, and in each case has absolute textual, scriptural authority for what it does. The Old Testament contains the warrant for genocide, for slavery, for the murder of children and old people in heaps, by the way. No, make Peter Singer blush on his worst day. It's right there, and it's a commandment, and it's in the same passages as the original, because the Ten Commandments appear several times, as you know, in the Old Testament in different versions, proving the triumph of relativism even in those pages and approximation. There, those commandments are, and there they stand. And it's only by deciding that, in fact, no, there are no religious and scriptural absolutes. It's only by that and by resorting to the Socratic dialogue and to moral suasion and to taking above all our own responsibility for ethics that we've managed to escape the terrible consequences that attend societies who take their commandments morally in tablet form and don't examine or discuss what it is that makes for the good life. So that by way of an immediate riposte. All we know is how little we know. That's been for many years my definition of an educated person. Someone who knows enough to know how ignorant they are. It actually is the only, it's not my own original definition, it comes from the Greek, but it's the only definition that works. And no one working, toiling in the field of science could possibly say anything less or more of themselves, especially at a time like this. But there you have it right away. The theistic and the deistic explanation has to be based on a certainty that there is a supervising and, if you want to be a theist, a caring and intervening creator who manages these matters. And there hasn't been a single sentence so far from Dr. Turek in support of that proposition. Let me give you an example. The event horizon of Stephen Hawking that I just mentioned, I'll take a cosmological one to begin with. The event horizon is the lip of the black hole. Suppose you could travel towards a black hole and see it, and see the lip of it, and notice it before you went in and over and down. That's what's known as the event horizon of physicists. Hawking had a gravely ill colleague in Cambridge who said if he knew he was definitely going to die, that's the way he'd like to go, be falling into the event horizon lip of the black hole, because in theory you'd be able to see the past and the future and time, except you wouldn't have quite enough time to do so. But there would be a grand way to check out if you were a physicist. Turn away from this, turn away from that. These incredible, majestic, awe-inspiring thoughts say that think about the burning bush instead. Think about the trivial miracles witnessed by sheep-herding peasants in Bronze Age Palestine. And think about the debt that they feel that we should incur for their sins. It was stated by Dr. Turek that the sins of these people, the transgressions of these people, and the debt they owe their Creator bind all of us as sinners. What a shame we're not perfect. What a shame there's nothing we can do about it. What a shame we're created already in prison and have to earn our emancipation. I tell you again, this is servility to the ultimate power. Now, there are people in this audience much better equipped than I to say that there is so far nothing in our natural world, to move away from the cosmological, there is nothing in our natural world, the globe we live on, that cannot be explained by random mutation combined with evolution by natural selection. Nothing works without that assumption. Everything works with it. There are lots of things that remain to be decided, but it's not a theory, or not just one. It does work, it is operational, it doesn't require a prime mover. Occam's razor says we should dispose of unnecessary, needless assumptions. That's what I propose we do in this case.